The year 1992 brought us a lot of great things. In films, we first saw Wayne's World, in music, Dr. Dre brought us The Chronic, and in the WWF, things would really start to evolve. Yes, with the steroid trial heating up and causing the landscape of the company to change forever, and whether he liked it or not, a new generation was about to dawn for Vince McMahon, but first, he would have to let go of the old one. But how did it all happen? Well, join us today as we take a deep dive into the entire story from start to finish in the WWF in 1992, a year in review. When we last left off, the WWF title had been vacated after the controversial finish to the Hulk Hogan and The Undertaker match at this Tuesday in Texas. And as a result of this, on-screen WWF President Jack Tunney had decided that a new champion would be decided at the upcoming Royal Rumble as, for the first time in history, the belt would actually be on the line in the titular match itself. And of course that led to a lot of people vying for a spot in the match, with babyfaces and heels alike staking their claims in the weeks that followed. One of the most notable of these, in fact, was Shawn Michaels, as with the Rockers having had their own internal difficulties in the months leading up to this, he would finally turn heel on his partner in a barbershop interview segment that aired in early January, super kicking Party Marty, then throwing him through a glass window in a moment that would become the defining one of his career up until that point. Elsewhere, other feuds carrying into the big match were Jake Roberts and Randy Savage's ongoing beef, The Undertaker's continued reign of dominance, Roddy Piper's desire to become a double champion, and Ric Flair's program with Hulk Hogan. So, with all this going on, it's no surprise that the Rumble itself that night on January 19th turned out to be a 5-star classic, with many still considering it the best of all the Rumble matches to this day. Before it took place, though, the undercard would see the Natural Disasters beat the tag team champions, the Legion of Doom, via countout, while prior to that, Roddy Piper had become the Intercontinental Champion, beating the Mountie after Bret Hart was stricken with a bad bout of the flu and had been forced to drop the title days before. And this, as it happened, would mark Piper's first ever title win in WWF, with him from there entering the 30-man Battle Royal later on in the night with the intention of winning the world title too. But the story of the 1992 Royal Rumble ultimately isn't about Roddy Piper. No, it's about Ric Flair, because he would undoubtedly steal the show that night, proving once again that he was probably the best wrestler in the world at this point as, after entering at number 3, he would spend the next hour in the ring, battling it out with everyone and showcasing the full extent of his endurance skills in a performance that very nearly turned him babyface. Yes, it didn't matter who he came up against. The British Bulldog, Ted DiBiase, Jim Duggan, Sid Justice. He survived them all and, on more than a few occasions, was even able to eliminate them. All while at ringside, Bobby Heenan would be putting on the performance of his career at the commentary booth. When Hulk Hogan finally made his entrance at number 26, however, most fans assumed that the party was over for the Nature Boy. How little did they know then, because when it came down to the final 3, Flair was still there, alongside the Hulkster and Justice. And in an even bigger shocker, in a moment that actually drew cheers from the live crowd, Sid would eliminate Hogan, with this causing the babyface to begin acting like a spoilt child as he from there sulked at ringside and grabbed the arm of the man who had fairly thrown him out, with this allowing the Nature Boy to sneak up behind him and dump him out too so as to win the whole thing. Yes, with a tear in his eye, Ric Flair was the new WWF champion. But while he was celebrating this backstage, the Hulkster would continue to bicker with Sid Justice in the ring, something which was done to set up a WrestleMania feud between the two. Of course, fans had originally wanted to see Flair vs. Hogan at the biggest show of the year, but by then, with the match failing to draw well on the house show circuit, Vince McMahon decided to pull the plug on the whole thing, with him setting up Hogan vs. Justice in a grudge match instead, while elsewhere on the card, Flair and Randy Savage would face off for the title. But the more immediate concern for him that night was the heel reaction his top star had gotten towards the end of the match, something which suggested that fans were finally tiring of Hulk's babyface antics. And that wouldn't be the only headache the boss would have to deal with over the next couple of months as, with the steroid trial really beginning to heat up, he would be forced to close down his burgeoning bodybuilding league, the World Bodybuilding Federation, something he'd started a couple of years prior in hopes of branching out from the wrestling industry. Yes, knowing that he was likely going to be indicted soon, McMahon felt like running a company full of the most roided-up men in America would be a bad look for him, so for now, the likes of Gary Stridham and Lex Luger would have to take a back seat as the boss instead refocused all of his attention on the WWF. And the next big show they had coming up was WrestleMania 8 on April 5th, where aside from the two big main events, the undercard would see Bret Hart regain his Intercontinental title in an absolutely excellent match with Roddy Piper that would see Piper do the honors in a rare pinfall loss. Elsewhere, the Natural Disasters would defeat Money Inc. for the tag team titles, while Shawn Michaels would pick up a win over Tito Santana in a match that was originally supposed to see the Heartbreak Kid defeat Marty Jannetty, but which had to be changed at the last minute after Party Marty got himself fired during the lead-up. On top of that, The Undertaker would make Jake Roberts the second victim of the streak after Roberts threatened to no-show the event unless he was released from his contract immediately afterwards, with him claiming here that he'd been promised a role on WWF's creative team prior to the event, only for this to then be rescinded once Pat Patterson returned to the company following the Ring Boy scandal. Things would go better in the first main event, however, as there, Ric Flair would defend the WWF title against Macho Man Randy Savage, with the two putting on the second classic of the night, as they spent the next 18 minutes battling it out. Come the end, though, it would be Savage who would be victorious, holding the company's top prize above his head for the second time as Ric Flair lay on the mat, a bloodied and battered mess. And in the final match of the night, Hulk Hogan would meet Sid Justice in a bout that had been promoted as possibly being the Hulkster's last leading into it. Yes, it seemed like, reading the temperature of the room in terms of the looming steroid trial and the growing number of boos he was receiving, Hogan had realized it was time to take a leave of absence from the WWF and let fans miss him for a while. That was why he planned to disappear after WrestleMania, but not before defeating Sid once and for all. Sadly, though, this match is more memorable now for the massively botched ending that saw Papa Shango miss his cue to do a run-in at the end, forcing Sid to instead become the first man to ever kick out of the leg drop of doom. When Shango did finally get to the ring, however, things would get back on track, as while the two heels were laying a beat down to the Hulkster, the Ultimate Warrior's music would hit, signaling his return to the company as, much to the delight of fans, he ran down to the ring to save the babyface and send the crowd home happy. Yes, even if Hogan were going to be gone for a while, at least the fans had the Warrior back, and so all seemed right with the world at the close of the show. Off-screen, though, concerns were growing as, despite the event having been promoted as a huge one, ticket sales were soft for the second year running, with an estimated 15,000 tickets having to be given out for free prior to the show so as to fill up the stadium. And to make matters worse, not only were Hogan and Jake Roberts gone, but both Roddy Piper and Sid Justice would also take hiatuses soon after WrestleMania, with this marking the first of many waves who would be missing come the end of the year. Still, the company had to push forward anyway, as they had another UK show coming up in April, UK Rampage 1992, that would see the British Bulldog once again play the hometown hero, defeating Irwin R. Shyster in the main event, while elsewhere on the card, Randy Savage would defend the WWF title against Shawn Michaels, and Bret Hart would retain his Intercontinental title against Rick Martel. And by this point, it was becoming clearer and clearer to WWF officials that, whenever they crossed the Atlantic, the Hitman was being treated like arguably their biggest star, something that the boss would take careful note of when he had to make a big decision later in the year. But it wasn't just Bret that the British loved. No, they were going wild for everyone as it turned out, and that was part of the reason why, with fan interest in the US continuing to wane, Vince McMahon decided to take his second biggest show of the year on the road, and for the first time ever, hold a major WWF pay-per-view outside of North America. Yes, on August 29th of 1992, SummerSlam would emanate from Wembley Stadium in London, England, with the rafters being packed here so as to hold a crowd of 80,000, WWF's legit largest attendance ever at that point. And hoping to equally play to markets on both sides of the pond then, the company would feature another double main event that night. One for the US fans that would see Randy Savage defend the WWF title against the Ultimate Warrior, and one for the UK fans that would see Bret Hart and the British Bulldog battle it out over the Intercontinental title. But that wasn't all that was happening on the stacked card that night as, in the opener, the Legion of Doom would receive a Road Warrior-worthy pop as they came out to lay waste to Money Inc., All well, following this, Nails would establish himself as a threat to watch out for by beating Virgil, and Shawn Michaels and Rick Martel would go to a double countout. As well as that, the Natural Disasters would defend their tag team titles against the Beverly Brothers, and The Undertaker would pick up a win over Kamala. That said, it was the main events that people really cared about, and the first of those would come when the Macho Man put the WWF title up for grabs in his bout with the Ultimate Warrior, a match that had slowly been building up during the months prior as, after returning to the company in April, the Warrior had immediately set his sights on reclaiming the belt that had once been his. But of course, at that point, Ric Flair was still involved in the title picture too, as with his rematch clause in place, he'd spent the spring trying to get it back from the man who had beaten him at WrestleMania. Ultimately though, the Nature Boy would not be able to win any of these matches, and so the Warrior was considered next in line, something which only served to infuriate the former WCW star. So, hoping to get in the heads of both men then, Flair and his executive consultant Mr. Perfect would attempt to sow the seeds of doubt ahead of the WWF title match, with them claiming that one of the participants had agreed to accept the managerial services of Perfect going forward and that their identity would be revealed on the night of SummerSlam itself. And while Savage and the Warrior would try to put this aside when the time came for the bell to ring, it was clear to see that it was on their minds as each worried about whether they would be getting screwed over come the end of the match. Still, with the company's top prize on the line, they battled it out as best they could, trading the advantage back and forth until, around the halfway mark of the bout, Flair and Perfect would walk down to the ring, from there seeming to help out the challenger, only to then lay him out once the referee had been knocked out too. So by this point, realizing that they were only there to cause trouble and had no interest in recruiting either man, the Macho Man would attack Flair, only for the Nature Boy to get the better of him here when he hit him across the leg with a steel chair at the ringside area. And this left the champion unable to get back in the ring before the 10 count, meaning that the Ultimate Warrior would win the match but would not win the title as it had happened on a countout. And of course, fans weren't happy with this ending of the night, given its inconclusive nature, but luckily for them, there was an even bigger match to come, as after that, fan favorite Bret Hitman Hart would defend his Intercontinental title against hometown hero the British Bulldog, in a match that was designed to send the live crowd home happy. What they didn't realize though was that, in the days prior to the bout, the Bulldog had spent most of his waking hours doing crack cocaine with Jim Neidhart, and so had forgotten everything he and Bret had planned for the match. And were it a lesser wrestler in the ring with him then, the whole thing would have fallen apart. Luckily though, the Hitman was already by this point approaching GOAT status, and so he was able to carry Davey Boy through the whole thing, playing the subtle heel and putting on what many still consider to be a career best performance as, by the end of it, the hometown boy would get the pin and the Intercontinental title to an absolutely massive pop. Yes, it was a crowning moment for Davey Boy Smith, and in a better world, this would have been his springboard to the top of the card. Sadly though, his drug issues would see him be fired not long after this, with the Ultimate Warrior quickly following him out the door too, as Vince McMahon began to tighten up his policies with the steroid trial drawing ever nearer. And the Warrior's exit also required a last-minute change in storyline as, with him and Randy Savage already being booked to face off against Ric Flair and Razor Ramon at the upcoming Survivor Series at that point, it would mean a familiar figure would have to come out of retirement and thus turn babyface once more in his absence. Before any of this would happen though, further big changes would be on the horizon for the WWF, because at a TV taping in Hershey, Pennsylvania on September 1st, the Macho Man would drop the WWF title to the Nature Boy. This reign, though, would only be a temporary one, as it turned out, because at a live event in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan just a month later on October 12th, Bret Hart would pin Flair in a surprise victory to start his own first run with the top prize. Yes, with Hulk Hogan seemingly gone for good by now, and the Ultimate Warrior no longer being a fallback option, Vince McMahon had been forced to decide who his next top babyface was going to be. And in the end, it came down to a short list which allegedly included names like the Texas Tornado, Crush, and even Tatanka. Based on how much support he was getting from European fans though, and how well he could perform in the ring, the boss chose to go with Hart instead, with this ushering in the beginning of a new, higher work rate era for the company's main event scene going forward. But the title win itself wouldn't be seen by fans for a while afterwards as, with it not happening at a TV taping and this being before the age of camera phones, footage was hard to come by. So when the Hitman showed up at a Superstars taping as the new WWF champion soon after, fans were confused but went with it anyway, happy to accept them as their new top guy. But that wasn't the only belt that was changing hands around this time, as, with the British Bulldog no longer able to keep up his commitments as Intercontinental Champion, he would be forced to drop it to Shawn Michaels on his way out the door. And this would set up another interesting match for the upcoming Survivor Series show, as, once again, the company would book a champion versus champion match, this time with only the world title on the line, and featuring the two superstars who would go on to carry the company for the next few years. Of course, even that wasn't the original plan though, as the plan had originally been for HBK to defend his IC title against a returning Marty Jannetty at this show. Before that could happen, however, Party Marty would predictably get fired again, with this keeping up his reputation as someone who just couldn't get out of his own way to let himself succeed. So while Bret and Shawn were getting ready to have their first Survivor Series match when the time for the show came on November 25th, the undercard would feature the Big Boss Man facing off against Nails, a purported former prisoner with a voice modulator who claimed that the babyface cop had inflicted police brutality on him while he was behind bars. And this would see the two fight it out in a nightstick on a pole match where, after 6 minutes, the Boss Man would send the jailbird packing. And unhappy with both this result and his apparently small payout after the match, Nails would confront Vince McMahon in his office afterwards, with the whole thing quickly getting heated from there, as he would allegedly try to strangle the boss, with this causing him to abruptly get fired from the company. Thankfully then, the next few matches wouldn't end in such high drama, as while Tatanka was keeping his undefeated streak alive with a win over Rick Martel, Randy Savage was introducing his new partner, Mr. Perfect, who, after having had a confrontation with Ric Flair on the November 16th episode of Primetime Wrestling, had once again turned to the side of the good guys. And with this new alignment in place, both he and the Macho Man would pick up a disqualification win over the Nature Boy and Razor Ramon that night, all while elsewhere, The Undertaker defeated Kamala in the company's first ever coffin match. New signing Yokozuna continued to build momentum as a monster heel when he pinned Virgil in just 3 minutes, and in the lone 4-on-4 Survivor Series elimination match of the night, the Natural Disasters and the Nasty Boys would defeat Money Inc. and the Beverly Brothers. Yes, WWF had clearly decided by this point that a card filled with elimination matches wasn't a big enough draw anymore, and so that's why, from here on in, Survivor Series would focus more on singles bouts. And the best singles bout of the night was still to come as it happened, because in the main event, we would get to see the WWF Champion and the Intercontinental Champion square off in a match that showed fans what the future of the company was going to be. And while this one is often forgotten in favor of their far more famous Survivor Series match from 5 years later, it was absolutely the better of the two from an in-ring perspective, with Bret getting to establish himself as a strong champion here, all while HBK proved he could hang in the main event scene. Of course, by the end it would be the Hitman who would retain, closing out the last big show of the year as the company's new top star. But with big new challengers such as Yokozuna on the horizon, he would have his work cut out for him if he wanted to remain in that position going forward. But that was news for 1993, because in terms of 92, things had drawn to a close. And what a transformative year it had been for WWF. It had begun with a main event scene dominated by the likes of Hulk Hogan, The Ultimate Warrior, and Sid Justice, and had ended with that very same scene now being filled with performers such as Bret Hart and Shawn Michaels. Yes, a lot of this was due to the upcoming steroid trial that saw the bigger physiques of yesteryear begin to get phased out and a new, more athletic style become the focus. But that shouldn't negate the fact that Bret and Shawn absolutely earned their spot, as by then, they were arguably the two best wrestlers in the entire company. So while it may not be the most fondly remembered year in WWF history, it's probably one of the most important, as it showed that, when forced to make a change, McMahon was still able to adapt, and while financially there were tough times ahead for the company, the in-ring product was, in some ways, about to get better than it ever had been before. Well guys, what did you think of the video? Let us know in the comments below. Don't forget to smash the like button, subscribe to the channel, as well as follow Wrestle with Andy on Instagram and Twitter. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.